Hello, everybody. This is the history lecture, and today I'm giving you a bit of a different video. While I work on my other projects that are currently ongoing, I'm going to do a reaction video to Washington's War full movie, General George Washington and the Revolutionary War. I'll put the link for the video in the description. So let's get started.
It is 1775, and the long simmering rebellion has burst out into open warfare. The Americans, the rebels, have the British Army surrounded at Boston.
Yeah. So the Revolutionary War was initially caused by Britain taxing American goods, and American goods could only be sold in British markets. So that really limited the colonies' trade, and all manufacturing power went to Britain. So they basically had to use British shipping to get their goods to Britain for them to be sold, and then take them the money all the way back to the colonies. Well, this often didn't work out too well, because either the shipping company would take their goods, get a lot of them damaged, especially in the South. Tobacco is a very fragile product, so they would be damaged by the shipping going over. So there would be less things to sell, so less money was going back to the colonists who grew the tobacco. And there was no insurance for this because the insurance was also provided by the British. Usually the same company that would take the product to Britain. And once in Britain, the people who took it to Britain would either mark the price way up so nobody would buy it, or only a few people would buy it and a small percent of the profits would go back to the farmers, or they would make it really low, the price really low. So again, only a small amount of money was going back to the colonies. And this was one of the reasons why when George Washington started to plant different crops at Mount Vernon, like wheat, grain, wheat and grain are the same thing, and why he built the flour mill, so he could take the grain and mill it up into flour and then sell it to colonies without having to take it over to Britain.
General George Washington, appointed by Congress to lead the Continental Army, rides to the front lines.
Yep, so George Washington for the Continental Army, the idea for him to lead it was originally brought up by John Adams. Another person was put forward, Charles Lee, to take charge of the army. But Charles Lee was born in England, and George Washington was born in Virginia, so they thought it would be a better idea to get someone who was actually born in the colonies to lead the Continental Army.
He finds his ranks filled with farmers, shopkeepers, and laborers. Not only are they inexperienced and undisciplined, but they also lack heavy guns and gunpowder. Though he is one of the most experienced officers in the colonies, Washington has never commanded a large army.
Yeah, and George Washington was always really good at instilling discipline into his troops. He was a strict disciplinarian. When he was in the French and Indian War, commanding outposts across western Virginia, he would often hang or flog soldiers if they were drunk. In one case, someone started a mutiny and all the leaders were hanged.
And it's been 16 years since he was last in a battle. Now, he faces one of the most capable armies in the world.
Yeah, so the English army wasn't the best army in the world. Many people say that at the time Britain had the best army. They had the best navy, but their army was not that large and the Prussians were more disciplined. They did have a more elite force, a smaller elite army, instead of having like France did in the Napoleonic Wars and earlier, where they would conscript people into the army. So they were a strong military power, and the army was disciplined, but it wasn't the best in the world.
The British Army occupies a strong position within Boston. To drive the Redcoats from the city will require a new and audacious plan. The key to the British position is Boston Harbor and the ships that supply the Crown's army. What if their supplies, their lifeline, could be threatened?
Yeah, like Napoleon said, an army marches on its stomach. If the ships weren't able to get into Boston to supply the garrison, they couldn't remain there, so they would have to pull back, which is something they would eventually do when Washington got guns from Henry Knox, marching them all the way down from Ticonderoga on these heights to blast at the ships.
Washington realizes that if he can occupy Dorchester Heights to the south, he can bring down cannon fire upon the harbor and its shipping. But where to get the guns? Washington orders Colonel Henry Knox to bring 50 artillery pieces from Fort Ticonderoga.
Yeah, so Fort Ticonderoga was a fort that was captured early in the war by Benedict Arnold and the Green Mountain Boys led by Ethan Allen. And he was largely overshadowed by Ethan Allen.
In one of the great feats of the war, his men hauled the cannon 300 miles over rugged terrain to Boston in just 2 months.
Yeah, and what makes it even more impressive is Henry Knox wasn't a professional artillery officer. He was a bookkeeper. I believe he ran a publishing company. And so he was able to get the guns on sleds and get them 200 miles, I think it said, to Boston, which is an incredible feat.
The guns are quickly put to use as Washington unleashes 3 nights of bombardment upon the British lines. But it was just a diversion, as the Americans...
Yeah, and there's a really good book written by Jeff Shara about the Revolutionary War and this campaign in Boston. And yeah, it does talk a lot about the diversionary attack and the taking of Dorchester Heights, because it really is America's first really big victory. Of course, they had taken multiple forts and won at the first battles, Lexington and Concord. But this time they actually took Boston, which was where the revolution started.
Secretly moved to fortify Dorchester Heights. Under cover of darkness, 2,000 men worked to build a massive fort on the high ground. Confronted at dawn by Washington's heavy guns on Dorchester Heights, the exposed British realize they have only one good option: to evacuate. Boston is now back in American hands. The Army celebrates its first great victory. Some believe the war is over. But the battle for America is only just beginning. Washington's victory at Boston encourages America's Declaration of Independence. The rebels will become...
Yeah, and they'll probably show it, but George Washington actually read the Declaration aloud to his troops after it was published. But George Washington did not sign the Declaration of Independence because he was with the Army in Boston.
Become Americans. But even as the Army celebrates the new declaration, the British arrive in New York Harbor with 32,000 soldiers.
Yeah, and up to this point, this is one of the largest amphibious invasions in history. This is an extremely large amount of troops. The Americans, after Boston, have about 20,000 inexperienced troops that weren't well equipped, and the British were coming with 32,000 well equipped and pretty disciplined and trained troops. And it looks like they're going to mess in the Hessians, they weren't really mercenaries. They were troops of a different country that were sent to Britain. They were part of an actual army. Most of them came from the German state of Hesse-Kassel. That's why they were called Hessians.
Including Hessians, German soldiers for hire. It's the largest expeditionary force the Crown has ever assembled. They rout Washington's army in battle after battle.
Yeah, and the Battle of New York is very interesting, and Washington gets defeated. His troops aren't disciplined enough to stay it. And he had actually built really good defensive works, but he missed a single path. New York was filled with a lot of loyalists, so when the British arrived, a loyalist showed the British a back route that allowed them to encircle Washington's defenses, which led him to pull back. And the entire army was almost destroyed here. If that fog on the night where they escaped Long Island hadn't come, the army would have fully surrendered. But there was a big fog, so the British stopped, and they were able to cross in to New York. And also another reason why the campaign was filled with missed opportunities is because the people who were in command of the army were also sent to try and negotiate peace with the colonies. So he didn't want to destroy an entire army. He wanted to still be able to maintain on good terms. So he kind of let him have mercy as he was negotiating with them. There's a really good book on it. It's called The Cause. It talks about that and other things.
From Long Island to Manhattan and out into the New Jersey countryside.
Yeah, so they are beaten back in battle after battle.
His army, once nearly 20,000 strong, is by December 1776 reduced to just 3,000. Many Americans believe that the cause is lost. Thomas Paine captures the desperate hopes of the moment. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman.
Yeah, so that is from a pamphlet that Thomas Paine wrote called The American Crisis. Thomas Paine also wrote Common Sense, which is what he's most famous for. And actually spent time in a prison in France, and I believe it was James Monroe, who was sent as ambassador to France, was able to negotiate him getting out.
While many have given up hope, General Washington has not.
I'm going to cut here.
Determined to strike a blow before the year was out, he spies a weak point in the British lines.
Yeah, and another reason he needs a victory is because a lot of the men's enlistments are up. And if they don't re-enlist, his army's gone. His army's only 3,000 strong. So massive unenlistments would cripple them entirely.
The Hessian garrison at Trenton, New Jersey appears isolated and vulnerable. But to reach them, his army must cross the ice-choked waters of the Delaware River.
Yeah, and there's a movie on this called The Crossing that talks all about this and through the days.
Washington develops a risky plan of attack. He will cross the river on Christmas night and surprise them at dawn.
Yeah, and contrary to popular belief, the Hessians were not drunk or disorderly. during this time. They were actually very well prepared, sleeping in their uniforms and with their guns near them. But the snowstorm had blinded them to Washington's attack. Also, they didn't really expect a massive attack during a snowstorm, but nevertheless, they were prepared, and really the thing that helped Washington a lot was the snowstorm that blinded the Hessians.
He will divide his army, sending one column south to block reinforcements, a second to cut off the Hessian retreat, and a third under his personal command to attack Trenton at dawn.
I don't remember who the commanders of all three, but I remember one of them was, his last name is Ewing.
All depends on stealth, the cover of night, and good weather.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how much it's snowing, so the Hessians couldn't have seen the attack coming.
Battered by sleet and high winds, Washington's boats struggle to cross in the face of huge chunks of river ice. They make it to New Jersey without the loss of a man, but they are now 3 hours behind schedule. Worse, the other two columns failed to cross.
Yeah, I was going to say that earlier, but both of these columns were not able to cross. So George Washington's now faced with a decision. Does he pull back across the river, or does he continue on? He ultimately decides to continue on, and the whole operation is a big success. But there was a risk in going forward without two other full columns.
His plan has fallen apart. Without surprise, would his army be exposed and destroyed? Washington, with the weight of the revolution on his shoulders, decides to press on to Trenton.
Yeah, and they do a good job of showing it there, how the Hessians, they have their weapons with them at all times. They're ready. They're not
Overcoming
drinking.
the pickets, the Americans discover to their amazement that most of the Hessians are still in their quarters. Surprise has been achieved.
And during the night, during this battle, the 5th president, James Monroe, is wounded. He's hit in the shoulder and is actually saved by a doctor that they encountered earlier that night. And the doctor was very surprised to see the army crossing and was like yelling at them to get off his property until he realized it was the American army and he offered his services up to them.
Washington quickly positions his artillery on the heights north of town, overlooking Trenton's streets. His force divides into columns and moves swiftly to encircle the stunned Hessians.
And the commander of the Hessian garrison, will probably mention him, is Johann Rall, and he's one of the few people to die in the battle.
The Hessians attempt several counterattacks, but the swift American advance and the mortal wounding of their commander proves too much. The remaining Hessians, some 900, surrender. With their captives in tow, Washington's army slips back across the river. Miraculously, the Americans lose only 2 men, lost not to Hessian bullets, but to the vicious cold.
Yeah, and this battle was such a masterpiece that Frederick the Great of Prussia said that it was the greatest military attack ever conducted. I don't know the exact quote, but it was along the lines of that. And Frederick the Great was he's called the Great, was a very good military commander in of himself.
Where Washington famously crossed the Delaware River, is one of the most decisive victories of.
And yeah, this painting obviously didn't happen. George Washington wasn't standing. And this here is supposed to be James Monroe, who wasn't on the same boat as him. But
the war.
Still a great thing.
But how to capitalize on the victory? Many of Washington's best soldiers are nearing the end of their tours of duty, and the British are already plotting their revenge. To keep his army from disintegrating, Washington appeals to his soldiers' patriotism.
And then he offers them more money.
He reminds them of the glorious cause and reinforces their patriotism with cold, hard cash. Responding to their general's appeal, the army once more sets off to confront the British. On January 2nd, 1777, Lord Charles Cornwallis, the same general who had driven Washington from New Jersey 6 months earlier, leads a force of 7,000 Redcoat and Hessian soldiers down the King's Road to Trenton.
Yeah, and this is another great victory by Washington. So you see here, this is their supply line at Princeton. All their supplies are running through this road junction. So Washington kind of uses a small force to try and hold it back while sending a larger force up to Princeton to cut their supplies.
These are some of the best troops in the British Army, and they are intent on destroying the American Rebellion once and for all. After fighting through Washington's advance guard, Cornwallis unleashes a series of powerful frontal assaults. Each driven back with heavy casualties.
Yeah, but the Americans can't really stand and hold. Even though they're doing well to blow back these initial assaults, they're not going to be able to do it forever. So that's why Washington ends up driving his column into their supply depot.
Nightfall fortunately halts the slaughter. Washington's defenses hold. Unfazed, Cornwallis declares that he will cross the creek and bag the old fox in the morning. Rather than wait for the British assault, Washington agrees to a bold but risky plan. One that will allow them to retain the initiative and avoid any sense of retreat in the face of the enemy.
We will march to Princeton.
Washington uses the cover of night to fool the British and marches his entire army around Cornwallis, driving deeper into enemy territory.
Yeah, and you can see the fires lit here. He kept the fires lit so the British would think he was still there, even though he wasn't.
When the British awake, Washington's entire army is nowhere to be found. The old fox has escaped. Just south of the town of Princeton, Washington rallies his troops and leads the final charge that buckles the British lines. Princeton is captured. Washington's third victory in just 10 days. The British, once on the verge of total victory, now retreat back to their lines around New York City, surrendering all of their summer games. Britain's archenemy, France, takes note of the American victories and moves closer to becoming America's ally. Washington's bold actions and stunning victories at Trenton and Princeton not only revived patriot morale, but quite simply saved the American Revolution at its bleakest hour. The next 4 years are filled with trials and setbacks.
Yeah.
Although the French Army and Navy have joined the American cause, New York City remains firmly in British hands. Charleston is...
So throughout the years after that campaign, you have famous things like the Battle of Saratoga, which really gets France involved in the war. And the plan is that one British column will march down here, and the one in New York will march up to cut the colonies in half. But instead, this column in New York goes and repositions to attack Philadelphia, where Washington loses the Battle of Brandywine Creek. But they end up winning at Saratoga, which drives the British back from the north. And then after the Brandywine Creek, Washington goes and sets up in Valley Forge. And before that, he has one last poorly coordinated assault at Germantown. But then they quarter in Valley Forge. And
Has fallen.
And also a Southern campaign is developing this time, and George Washington sends down Nathanael Greene, one of his best generals, to deal with it.
And Benedict Arnold, one of America's most celebrated generals, has deserted to the British side. America is out of money, and the will to fight seems almost at an end. Poorly supported by Congress, Washington must plead for even the most basic necessities for his dwindling army. Martha Washington, braving capture, camp disease, and ferocious winter weather, travels north to stay with Washington at his Valley Forge and Morristown encampments.
Yeah, and Valley Forge is the more famous of the winter encampments, but Morristown is actually the coldest and most brutal. That winter, from 80 to 81, was the coldest winter in North America. Well, really, like Pennsylvania, since like 100 years ago. So it was the coldest weather recorded since 100 years ago, which was crazy.
Thank you for your service, dear.
But even her presence is not enough to overcome his growing sense of dread. By 1781, Washington wonders how much longer his army and the new country can hold together. Writing, "Now or never, our deliverance must come." But just when all seems lost, Washington learns of a new opportunity to strike a decisive blow.
Yeah, and George Washington never expected a final battle in Virginia at Yorktown. He always thought the revolution would end with the capture of New York, and that's why he would stay up in New England throughout the war, was because he always was waiting for an opportunity to take New York until the opportunity for Yorktown came.
His old foe, Lord Cornwallis, has led his army to the coastal village of Yorktown, Virginia, where he awaits evacuation. If the Allied Army and French Navy can converge there first, it might just be possible to capture Cornwallis's entire force. Even before it is certain that the French fleet will arrive, Washington and his allies decide to seize the opportunity. As Washington's army reaches Philadelphia, they learn the exciting news. A French fleet under Admiral de Grasse has defeated the British Navy at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The French warships have cut off Cornwallis's escape. When the American and French
Yeah, and without that victory, the troops at Yorktown probably could have escaped.
columns arrive outside of Yorktown, they immediately begin to construct their lines. With heavy siege guns now in place and the French Navy blocking the sea routes, Cornwallis and his army are trapped.
Yeah, and if you look back there, George Washington put his Americans on the right on purpose, because that was the position of honor, where you would put the
Now,
best troops.
they will tighten their grip. Washington himself fires the first shot of the siege.
And I believe it may have been this shot, or a shot a little later, but one hits right in the middle of a table where Charles
On October 9th,
Cornwallis is sitting.
1781. Soon, thousands of French and American shells bombard the British lines at Yorktown. Despite the intense barrage, Cornwallis and his beleaguered troops hold out. With the threat of autumn hurricanes, the French Navy's presence cannot be assured. Victory requires one more push. The Allies need to see these two advanced British...
Yeah, then you could see Redoubt 9 and Redoubt 10 are majorly important positions in the British Army, because it's kind of their last thing that's stopping Washington from just marching right into the city.
British positions to be able to fire cannons into Cornwallis's lines at point-blank range. In a daring night raid, the French attack Redoubt number 9, while the Americans, led by a young Alexander Hamilton, assault.
Hamilton would later become Secretary of the Treasury, and I think the leader of the French was General Dupont. I think he commanded the French attack.
Redoubt number 10.
He may have been a colonel.
With these redoubts secure, Allied guns fire 1,700 rounds a day at point-blank range into the British lines. With no hope of relief,
You're dismissed.
Cornwallis considers the unthinkable. On October 19th, 1781, 8,000 British soldiers march out of their lines and surrender.
Yeah, and this was a big deal, not because it didn't allow the British Army to attack. The British Army still had a massive army in the Americas. They had thousands in New York and thousands in some of the Caribbean islands. But the war had been going on for so long, and this kind of defeated the morale of the British to keep going.
When news of the disaster at Yorktown reaches across the Atlantic, Lord North, the British Prime Minister, exclaimed, "Oh God, it's all over." Exhausted by the ongoing struggle and facing growing unrest at home, King George III reluctantly, bitterly, agrees to end all further attempts.
And, yeah, so this is George Washington here. He doesn't actually take the surrender. Here, I think Benjamin Lodge does it, I think. But basically, he had been defeated by the British and had to do a surrender like this early in the war. So Washington let him surrender. And actually, this isn't Cornwallis. He said he was feeling ill, so he sent his second-in-command. And I'm going to real quick check the name of the guy who accepted the surrender. Benjamin Lincoln, that was Benjamin Lincoln.
To reclaim his wayward colonies. After learning of the 1783 Treaty of Paris ending the war, Washington himself declared America's victory as little short of a standing miracle. Beloved by his soldiers and trusted by the public, General George Washington could have become an American king. Instead, on December 23, 1783, he publicly surrenders his military commission to Congress.
Yeah, and King George III said that if he surrendered his military command and went back to public life, he'd be remembered as the greatest man who ever lived, because he gave up all that power. But he would actually become commander of the whole American Army again under John Adams' administration.
His act ensures that the people and their choices, not a military dictator, will govern the future. After 8 long years of war,
And this is why Washington's remembered as one of the greatest presidents, and rightfully so. He could have taken ultimate power and doomed American democracy forever, but instead he surrendered his power and returned to Mount Vernon and only served 2 terms when he did become president.
Washington is finally able to return to his family.
And also with Mount Vernon and George Washington, when he was fighting the French and Indian War, him and a bunch of other veterans were offered land for their military service. Well, it wasn't until after the treaty that they were finally able to get their land, over 2 decades after they should have gotten
And
it.
cherished home, Mount Vernon. Here,
Yeah, at Mount Vernon, George Washington massively turns it around. When he found it, it was very small. The house was dilapidated, but he was able, by studying agriculture, his career in surveying, so soil work, and his ability to kind of create an independent manufacturing at his farm, where he was able to grow grain and then turn the grain into flour, and he eventually started making leather and barrels, and then his whiskey distillery. So George Washington's plantation was not as big or grand when he first got there.
he plans to live the remainder of his life peacefully, under his own vine and fig tree. But it won't be long till the new nation, the United States of America, calls for his leadership once more.
Yes, this is always a great channel with great content. I recommend you check it out. And thank you for watching. See you next time.